So very good evening to all of you. Very warm welcome to WebStack Academy's Masterclass webinar series. It's a very interesting time today because we are kickstarting our Masterclass webinar series for the first time as a part of the WSA umbrella. Even though we have been doing the webinar, Masterclass webinar under our Immersive umbrella for a long period of time. I'll again talk about what is the connection between Immersive and WSA shortly. And this particular goal of this webinar is to basically invite folks from the industry who are working and involved in the full stack web development or some aspect of full stack web development, and bring it their real-time experience sharing. Whenever we speak to them, we ask them to share their experience to budding engineers like you who are aspiring to have your career in the full stack web development, right? So that's a main goal. So that way we have Mr. Hitesh, who is a speaker. I'll also shortly introduce him. After that, I'll hand over the presentation to him so that he can further, take through the proceedings. He's going to do the majority of the presentation. I'm just doing the introduction session. And added to that, we also want to basically, make it interesting. So there are some certificates for the participants, goodies for the quiz winners, etc. So please, spend some time in the subsequent slides to, get some more details, right? So let me introduce ourselves, WebStack Academy and us. So basically, we are an edtech company. We have been in this education for almost like 20 years now. Our original idea of education started off in the year 2004 by starting Immersive. Immersive, many of you know, it's a edtech company focusing on embedded systems and IoT related technologies. Many of you done internship with us, some of you are doing full-time courses with us, placement oriented courses, etc., right? So then we wanted to, subsequently we established leadership position in the embedded domain, and we wanted to venture into the application training or the trainings in the application side, right? So that's when we started off what you call Java trainings way back in 2009. That time, if you remember, Java was the programming popular by then. But then subsequently, those times we had a partnership with a foreign university, mainly based out of South Korea. So those South Korean students used to come and take up these trainings, and also we used to get them certified. That time it was called Oracle Java Certification Program, or OCJP, or Oracle Web Developer Certification, or OCWCD, if I'm not wrong, the abbreviation. So that is how our footprint into the applications training started. So our focus has been largely, not on the employability side, but our idea was more on the college side and how to bring in employability. Then Oracle, as I said, subsequently following with Java, we had this partnership called WDP, Workforce Development Program, where we partnered with Oracle to deliver Java and Android-based training programs throughout the state of Karnataka. We worked with many of the colleges and delivered those programs. And then the web development has gone through a lot of changes. So that's when we also felt that not to do all the training programs under one brand name or umbrella. That's when we introduced this particular new brand called as WebStack Academy, or WSA. So WSA is basically a new brand from our Immersive group company, or the holding company. Our leadership team, our delivery team, placements team, pretty much we belong to the same entity. But for Immersive, we want to have it as a specialization towards embedded systems and IoT, and WSA we want to more towards all the application related training programs. So that is how the idea of WSA started. But by then, it was also a timeline where where the concept of full stack web development started. So we introduced our program based on Myntra. Myntra basically, as you all know, MongoDB, Express, and Angular and Node. Because if you look at 3-4 years back, when multiple front-end frameworks were introduced, so I would say that time the Angular was leading the pack. But I guess over the period of time, the story has changed a lot. Probably today we'll also hear from Hitesh about that. The React has taken over, right? So that's what we started off. And then we are now kind of restructuring our course to make it these full-time courses for engineering students, right? To make it more suitable for product development companies. So the course structure is going through significant change. We're introducing, I would say, very innovative pedagogy for our students who can take up our long-term courses. It's going to be a 9-month long program. I'll share the dates and how to get in touch with our counseling team later towards the presentation, right? And also, the web stack, the web development paradigm is changing very fast. And today probably we'll get to hear some of them during this presentation, right? So that's what we do. We offer training programs for look at from a target audience or the problems that we are trying to solve. Two things we are trying to solve. One is on the employability side. Employability, as you all know, India has become a country of engineers, where we first become engineers, then decide what to do. So we are aspiring to solve the problem by introducing hands-on training programs in the MERN stack and helping them to bridge the skill gap and get into the first job, mainly focusing on the product development companies. That's our focus. In the similar lines, we also see a lot of folks who get into the first job, but the job profile is not meeting their aspirations. For even if they get into web development, probably they're working in legacy stack like .NET, or something related to PHP, or they're in a Java, even a Java based Spring or Hibernate type of stack, right? So where they want to move on to modern day scalable web application stack like MERN. So we work with them, upskill them, and then give them a profile upliftment so that they can also transition from a legacy web development company to a modern day product development web company. So that's what we do as an organization. Now our leadership team, many of you know, who've been attending our webinars. Three of us part of Emergy's leadership team. Maz is a founder and managing director of Emergy and also for WSA. Mubin is a technology head who leads a training delivery side. And Mayan Jaikumar, I'm part of the leadership team. I primarily look into the various outbound programs that we run as a part of WSA. Be it the internship, I see a lot of interns have come today. Our interns and our induction classes and webinars. So all the outbound programs that I run, apart from leading the placement responsibilities in Emergy. Okay, so that's what we do as a team. And that's about introduction about WSA and what we've been doing. Now let us talk about the master classes. So what is our master class webinars and why we need to do this webinars, right? So to put it in simple terms, I would like to keep this at two M's, M1 and M2 or M1M, whatever you can call. As I mentioned initially, we invite people who are really experienced in that particular domain and share their experience with you. So with that, what happens is there's a live mentoring is happening, right? And this is going to be a live session. You can ask all the questions to a speaker. I'll be moderating the session, like how we are typing many questions here. So there'll be a lot of mentoring because he's going to talk from his based on how he learned, how he has grown up in his career, and how you can build your career in the front end web development. That's what he's going to talk about. And when he's probably clarifying some of the big picture and how he has went and did whatever he could do, generally we see people derive a lot of motivation, right? They also can plan their career, can plan certain activities around that. So that gives you what you call a push to move forward in your career. So that's a major idea about these web masterclass webinars which have been doing under the Emergy umbrella over the years, but we are now introducing for WSA, right? So just one particular slide before I introduce the speaker and talk about the today's topic, right? If you look at web applications, it is going through a lot of changes. The front end, what we see is as a user, what comes in your screen and what comes in your UI, and the back end is where the entire logic or the magic happens, right? So today we are going to talk about front end. Front end also has gone through a lot of changes. Earlier what it was started off as a simple a form submission or doing certain button press or something like that, right? Today if you look at web applications, they evolved a lot. Today we call them as a single page application or SPA, where using a single browser screen you are pretty much able to operate all the application functionality just like you are using a web or a desktop based application. A simple case I wanted to relate is Microsoft Word versus Google Docs, right? If you look at the screens, pretty much they look the same. And I think majority of us don't realize that Google Docs runs as a part of the web, whereas our Microsoft Office runs as a part of the desktop, right? Similarly, you can give many examples. The gap between a desktop-based application and the web applications, only reducing thanks to some of the technologies that has been introduced in the web technology area, web development area, like be it React, be it Angular, right? So that is something makes the front-end development very interesting, right? It's not like we are going to write something just some coloring, some dabbas, or putting some kind of a boxes. No, that's not the way how the front-end development. The front-end development, as I would say, has evolved into what you call front-end engineering, where a lot of engineering elements, a lot of problem-solving elements are going to come, right? So with that note, I would like to introduce today's topic and the speaker. It's really our pleasure to invite Mr. Hitesh Kumar into our today's webinar. So he's going to talk about front-end developers career roadmap. He's having about 10 years of experience. Started off with bigger companies. For example, started with companies like Intime Tech and Great HR, where he was involved in web application development of legacy stacks. Then, as you all know today, the India's e-commerce and the online success story. Then he transitioned into modern day product development companies by working with companies like Myntra, and then subsequently couple of startups that he's been part of, where it's not only the e-commerce, it's all about fast fashion, what you call the fashion tech or e-commerce applied to the fashion industry, etc. So that way he brings in a very wide variety of experience, starting from a legacy or a big company to a modern day startups. So he's got a lot of things to share, right? So before I share my particular screen to him, there are a couple of other notes to all the participants. One is like, please stay toward the session and attend. All the participants will get a certificate after the webinar gets over. The GoToWebinar tool which you are using gives you the detail about how much hours you attended. So depending on you attending, we want to motivate you guys, right? From WSA side, we'll do that. And towards the end, we'll also open up a quiz, right? So what is the quiz? How you can participate in the quiz? That also I will open up after you attend the session, right? Towards I'll again come back and take over the the session, and then I will share you details. So please stay stay tuned and keep good concentration. I know it's going to be a really exciting topic that is there. Please keep a note of whatever the speaker is sharing. So quiz will be based on that, and our team in the coming week will evaluate your quiz and then come up with a set of winners, and then we'll be shipping you some set of goodies. I know people who are being part of an internship system know that, right? We conduct quiz and give goodies. So basically, with these things we do to keep your motivation high. Okay. So with that note, let me invite Hitesh. Hitesh, can you turn on your camera? Hitesh.
Hi, Jia. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Good evening, Hitesh. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
I'm good. So let me make you a presenter, and then I will sign off. Probably I will, as I mentioned, you can take over the session. Time to time, I will pause you as and when more questions are coming up in the screen, and then I'll read you through. You can answer, so that we can keep the session interactive. Let me make this presenter so that you can share your desktop. Yeah, we are able to see your desktop.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll go off the camera, so it's up to you. Okay, please go ahead and run the session. Okay, thank you very much, Hitesh.
Yeah, thank you, Jia. Cool. So, first of all, thank you, Jia, for such a warm welcome. Thank you for having me here. It's been really long time I've given any like tech talk or something, so I was slightly a bit nervous, but then I saw that okay, lots of aspiring front-end engineers are there, so it was also like motivated me that okay, yeah, a lot of people require mentorship or some guidance, because front end is something which is evolving a lot these days, and I thought that okay, let's take up this topic and let's talk about the front end developers, like career roadmap sort of thing, that how do you actually become a front end developer. Cool. So as you know, my name is Hitesh, and I'm from Rajasthan. I'm assuming you can see my screen, Jaya. Cool. Okay. So hi everyone. Thanks for joining. That too on a weekend Saturday evening, and still when India Pakistan is going on. Thank you for taking time and joining the session. I really appreciate it. So yeah, a bit about me. I'm Hitesh. I'm from Rajasthan. I'm a UI engineer by profession. I've been like to many roles. I've been like Android developer also. I've done some sort of backend also, but most of my work relies on the UI part. I occasionally also blog whatever my findings are there on my day-to-day work on my personal blog, smellycode.com. You can check it out. I also have my personal website. I actually bought it when Google launched .dev domain. I actually wanted hitesh.dev, but for some reason it was not available, so I had to go with hiteshkumar.dev. I'm also very active on Twitter. I'm not recently tweeting anything, but I'm like very active, so you can reach out to me on Twitter. My handle is underscore smellycode, and I'm also an amateur ukulele player, so maybe you'll find some of my ukulele struns on Twitter. And one thing about me is I'm a huge fan of memes. I like memes a lot, so be ready for a lot of fun memes or tech memes in the webinar. Cool. So let's quickly talk about my experiences, what all things I've done in the past. So I've done my BTech from SKIT Jaipur. Uh, in my BTech, I actually did not learn much because I used to be studious, but I was also doing something else. Because of that, my study got impacted. So when I was in third year, I started learning Java and native Android, and I was fascinated by this whole app development thing. So I almost developed like 50 plus apps because my college required an Android application or mobile application for all the people who were doing their project. So they wanted a web and an app version, and I was one of those people who were doing the app development. So all of my friends came to me. So I really got a good hands on Android on that time. And then I did my internship from one of the startup in Bangalore, Jaipur itself. And I developed an app there called Kuwait Talent Bank. So it's like a sarkarinaukri.com, which like basically offers the jobs for the people who are in Kuwait. And then I got an on-campus placement to the company in Time Tech. So it's an MNC company. There for some time I worked on an Ionic app, and then they were building an in-house product from scratch, and they wanted a front-end developer for that. So front-end developer especially who can work on the website. So I was not aware with the whole web part and all, and Angular JS was very popular on that time. The concept of mean stack also I learned there. So on that time, MongoDB, Express, Angular, and Node were very, very popular. So I learned about all the JavaScript and all of these things on the job itself. Most of my learning in my career have happened by reading the code of other people, or maybe the code of libraries available on the open on the GitHub, or any like book, or if I'm coming across any interesting idea or something, I'll mostly explore that code itself. And after that, I moved to Bangalore. I joined a company called Creative. They were in payroll and HR software. They are in payroll and HR softwares. So I joined there as an SSE, senior software engineer. I revamped their employee self-service portal, which was built on legacy system. I moved it to Angular 2 and the version, and totally like rewrote it from the scratch. And they were also building an employee onboarding portal where like a new employee joins an organization, so you need to collect a bunch of documents and all. So I also created that entire module from scratch. uh, and then I got bored, so I was looking for something else, and then I joined Myntra. When I joined Myntra, entire Myntra was on the React side. Nobody uses Angular in Myntra, so I had to learn React, and then I explored Money Stack there. I was in the supply chain inbound department of Myntra. In that department, there's a team called Vota that basically provides insights to the entire Myntra or all the partners on Myntra in terms of what to buy, what to sell, and all. So I was working as a technical lead there. I was leading their UI charter, and I almost worked there for 3 years. Then I joined a startup called Virgio, which is started by one of Myntra's ex-CEO only. It was a fast fashion startup. It was Gen Z focused. We were planning to build both app and web. So I learned React Native there, and architected the whole Burgio's app from scratch. It reached 100,000 plus downloads on both Play Store and App Store. And after that, me and my bunch of friends and we all decided to start something else. So we started like Tectonic, and at Tectonic, we are basically platformizing growth for all the D2C brands. So basically, presently, most of these brands which are on Shopify or on other platforms, they are facing some of the challenges where you have your website, you have your app. All of these are not unified. They're all driven by a plugin. So no, most of the time these plugins don't communicate with each other and all. So they face a lot of performance issues. And also when we developed an app at Virgio, we realized that, okay, we have a way to develop unified storefront. So I've recently started working on that. Presently, we are using React Native there, and we are also doing server-side rendering using a framework called Remix. Cool. So agenda of the meeting is we'll quickly talk about what is front end, and then we'll discuss the roadmap for a tech stack that is presently being used on the front end of the modern tech stack, I would say. And then we'll look at the roadmap and how does one become a front end, what are things one has to learn to become a front end developer. So basically your journey from 0 to 1, and then we'll also look at some of the advanced concept, then how you go from 1 to 10. So I'll give you a lot of pointers and hooks for you to like become a front end developer in the roadmap, and then we'll quickly I'll share some of the interview tips because I have been on the both side as an interviewer and as an interviewee, and I'll also some of the share the personal interview experiences because I feel that as an engineer and aspiring developers, right? You work hard a lot, but in the interview, like preparing for an interview is a completely different thing while preparing or learning technical things. So I'll share some of the tips, cool, and then we'll have QA sessions. Okay, so let's start with what is front-end development, right? So engineering itself has become a very complex profile, I would say. There are lots and lots of different profiles, and most of these profiles are basically defined by the work that people typically do, right? So, for example, if somebody is developing the APIs or backend, right? People typically call them backend developers, and then people who are working on the UI part, they call them front-end developer. These days there's a separate profile for the app developer and the web developer, so this is why like they simply call them this mobile app developer and the front end developer. And then there are UX engineers, then full stack developers, then DevOps, QA, and all of those things, right? So front end developer is like one of the most interesting profile in my opinion because especially the front end developers, right? They develop something with which user is directly interacting. So it's sort of, I would say, the development of visual interfaces that the UX team has defined, right? So something that was just an idea, front end developers actually materialize it. Front end developers mostly work with backend developers, product manager, UX designers, and all the various stakeholders to uh, develop the actual interfaces that are visually appealing and that meets the business requirement. Cool. So now let's talk about tech stack for the front end development. So every time like somebody talks about the tech stack for the front end development, I get reminded of this meme, which typically says that you start with a div and some boxes on the side, and then you learn React or something, and then you'll explore web securities, and then you explore various build tools and all, right? So like I've been doing front end developer at least since last 9+ years. So I've seen like front end growing massively. So I remember those days where front-end development per se was not very complex. Things were very straightforward. Things were just evolving. But these days, like front-end development, like it has become equally complex and challenging as any other pillars of the software development. Uh, in earlier days, like web was just web. You were writing some code on PHP on your backend, and then they were generating HTML and you were shipping on the client. but now web has evolved a lot. But one thing I one thing that has always like tested the time is the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Doesn't matter how many framework have come, doesn't matter what all tools have come into picture. HTML, CSS, and JavaScripts are always there. So if you want to be front-end developer, I highly recommend spending some time on these areas, because frameworks typically come and go, but these are like fundamental, I would say, languages or technologies that are powering the entire web today. Everything is built on top of that, that abstracts these things out. But if you have a good grasp on this, then you're pretty much sorted. Uh, Typically, when you're doing the web app development, you also use some of the frameworks or libraries like Angular, React, Svelte, Vue, and all of those things. Uh, then if, let's say, you're more focused about server side rendering, where performance is critical, or maybe you want to provide better search engine optimization, ranking, and all, then you also do server side rendering. Then there are frameworks for that, are Next.js and Remix. This is a very new thing. I would not say it's very new. It's like a recent addition to the JavaScript world. It's called WebAssembly. So this is one of the most interesting aspect of web development. So earlier, what used to happen, that you always needed JavaScript or some variant of JavaScript that has to, like, that requires a JavaScript runtime that can be executed on the browser. With WebAssembly, what happens that you can write your favorite you can write your programming, your favorite programming languages like C, C++, Rust, Java, and all, and then you use WebAssembly compiler to compile it in a format that browser can run. So if you look at like Google Docs, or if you look at like recently Adobe released Photoshop's desktop, the web app, right? So all of these technologies internally uses WebAssembly, where you ship a binary with your website, and it runs in the browser. It runs in a safe sandbox environment, so you don't have to worry about the security issues and all. Then let's say if you're doing front mobile app development, right? So in the mobile app development, there are typically there's Android, which is like based on Java, Kotlin, and then you have iOS, which is like Objective C and Swift. So these are all native development. But if you're somebody who is passionate about JavaScript, right, or who is passionate about having a universal code base or a universal component framework, where you write your one code and run it everywhere, right? Then maybe you're familiar with React.js, or your organization uses JavaScript for everything, right? Then you can use React Native or Ionic maybe. But let's say if you are somebody who really wants a native look and feel, then you can go with Flutter or Xamarin. Okay, cool. So far this was about the tech stack that was being used on the front end. Now let's talk about the roadmap. Cool. So there are a bunch of things I've added in the roadmap. But just to give you a heads up that this roadmap will not make you front-end developers overnight, but it will actually give you some of the pointers and hooks, I would say, that can help you become a front-end developer. What do I mean by that is that it will give you enough topics to learn from various tools available over the internet, so that you can at least start your journey from 0 to 1. So treat this roadmap as a map, not a territory. Treat it just like a guide, because the actual implementation of the roadmap or the learning will depend from person to person. So treat it like a guide for you. Cool. So the very first thing we'll talk about in the roadmap is internet. So I was showing this slide to my friend, and when he saw internet in his, he actually started laughing. He was like, "Dude, internet is something everybody knows." So I was like, "Okay, but it's something is it's something which everybody is familiar with, but most of the folks actually, especially who are aspiring front-end developers, or especially people who have been in the industry, right? They learn about the fundamentals of internet in a hard way, right? For example, let's say if you're having a protocol issues, or if you're having a network error, or if you're having an SSL error, right? All sort of issues you'll figure out when you're actually doing the when you're actually doing the development or deploying your app or something. So this is why I've added internet as a point here. then in the roadmap, I've added the languages of the web, that what is basically web build up, what are languages you need. And I've also added some of the frameworks that I feel that that makes your life, that will make your life easy in terms of whether you want to speed up the development or get a new job, or maybe learn something interesting or build an app you want to build. And then I've also added testing. So testing is something which typically, if a company is hiring for a UI developer, it might, if you're a fresher, they will not probably look for it. But let's say if you're 1 or 2 years experienced person, right, and you're making a switch, they will probably look in your profile that whether you've written unit test cases and all of those things. So this is one point I've added for that reason. Then package managers. So these are like some of the build tooling related issues, like how do you share your code with somebody? How do you ship something as a dependency so other people can use it? So these are like some of the advanced concepts which will help you to go from 1 to 10, but they help you a lot in terms of getting a job. Then the build tools, because since front-end development have evolved a lot over the last 5 or 10 years, uh, now the way you're shipping your app has changed massively. So earlier you typically used to have a HTML file running on the server and you simply send it as it is. But these days, like as web development has become more complex and complex, you need to take care of how are you bundling your app, how are you packaging it, how are you deploying it somewhere and all. And I've also added version control system in the roadmap. So version control system, so people who are already working in the corporate section, who are like having 0 to 3 years of experience, might be knowing about it, but typically people who are interns or looking for a job, right, uh, they are generally not familiar with version control system. Is also, it's basically a way of collaborating a tool or maybe tracking what all changes you have made, similar to like Git and GitHub. And I've also added server side rendering, because gradually uh, as web development become more complex and complex, people are shipping lots and lots of JavaScript. Because of that, they are seeing so many performance issues. And now industry is gradually moving towards server side rendering, and that's why a lot of frameworks are also coming for this. So this is so that's why I've added this point as also in the roadmap. And progressive web applications. So we'll briefly touch about PWAs as well, and what are progressive web application. And briefly we'll talk about the mobile application as well. Cool. So let's start with the journey. Cool. So
So,
internet.
Hitesh, just a minute. Let
Yeah.
me check your audience whether how they're doing. Any questions are there?
Sure. Sure.
So, guys, can you just quickly respond? Are you able to? I think so far what Hitesh has done is introduced what is front-end development and a very high-level elements of the roadmap. Now he's going to cover detailed aspects of every point in the roadmap. Are you able to connect whatever is mentioned so far? Any questions do you have? Can I get some responses? Are you able to connect? Okay. Tarun is telling yes, sir. Can I get some more responses? Okay. Jyoti. Any questions do you guys have? No doubts. Okay. I think now this is the main thing. In case you guys have any questions, you don't need to wait. You can keep typing in the chat window. As I said, I'll pause like how I'm pausing now to the speaker and then take up your questions. Okay. So you don't need to wait. As and when it comes to your mind, you can just type it in the. Okay, explain with clear. Okay, yeah. Now it's going to do a deep dive of the real meat. He's going to start right now. He's been giving more about overview. Okay, great. I'm getting a lot of responses, Hitesh, about 20-25 of them are saying no doubts. You can proceed. Okay, please proceed. Any
Great.
questions, guys? Please feel free to type. Okay, I will take it up. Okay, great. Please proceed.
Cool. Yeah. Thanks. Yeah. Thanks. Yeah. Cool. So let's quickly talk about internet a bit. So as I said earlier, right, I'll be giving you enough hooks and pointers to what to learn to get you a job, or maybe to become a full-fledged 10x front-end engineer. So one of the fundamentals which I feel that every front-end developer should know is about how does an internet work, right? So if you look at internet, right? So internet is typically I would say it's a global network of computers, or literally the network of networks, right? Where each computer is connected with another computer and they talk to each other through a standardized protocol. These protocols are predefined. Some of the popular protocols are like HTTP, HTTPS. These days, gRPC is also becoming very popular. Then the next thing, which in my opinion you should look for, is like the difference between HTTP and HTTPS. What are these various protocols? How does this work, right? So let's say HTTP typically follows the client server model, where client tries to open a connection with the server and then waiting to receive the response. HTTP is also stateless and all. So sometimes in the interview, or maybe when you're looking for a job, right, people do ask the basic questions. So but in as a general overview, as a front-end developer, since you work most of the time with the browser and the internet, right, so these are some of the areas which in my opinion you should be familiar with, because as you develop more and more app, these concepts do not become textbook concept, but they actually start being used in your day-to-day life, right? That how do you make a network request? Do you use a HTTP client or an FTP client? So all sort of those things start happening. So yeah, like this is something which you should try to explore. There are lots of material available online, so you can simple Google query or like learning from Web Stack Academy should also help. Then what I seen, like people typically get confused, like what a domain and a domain name and all of those things, right? So these things sounds very straightforward, that hey, this is the domain name, but what does it actually mean? What does it represent, right? So learning about domain names and all of these things, then learning about the actual domain name system, right, and how it does work, right? So is it like a phone book of IP addresses where the lookup happens? Who is doing those lookups and all of those things, right? Because for us, it's very difficult to remember the addresses of our devices, right? And all of addresses of our devices are like some numeric numbers, right, which are hard to remember. We are even not able to remember our mobile numbers, then how do we remember the addresses of a website, right? So that's why the whole concept of domain name or DNS came into picture, where you don't have to remember something, you just get it as a plain text which is mapped to some of the IP addresses of the computer which is connected over the internet. So these sort of things. Now these are like basic networking things. The next thing which you should explore is hosting. So basically, when you have done your part developing an application, right, how do you make it accessible to the entire world, right? So you cannot like simply make like carry your computer everywhere and show it to people. So one way you can do is like you can simply create a public IP from your system and show it to the people. Another way is like you look for hosting providers which are doing this job all the time, right? So some of the popular hosting provider like GitHub pages, Cloudflare pages, and all of those things, right? So this is one of the area which you should have rough idea. You should not actually think that okay, I have to deep dive into it, but you should at least have a general idea, so that when you need to host something, or when you need to host your personal blog or maybe your personal website, right, you should be able to host it without any issue. uh, Another thing which I see people getting confused is about internet and the web, right? So internet is basically you can think of it as the infrastructure where billions of computers are connected with each other, while web is more of a service that runs on that infrastructure. There are many other services also, like email and internet relay chat. But we people often use internet and web interchangeably. The next thing, in my opinion, which you should look for is the browsers and how do they work. So we typically, as a user of the browser, we know almost in and out of the user from the usability point of view, that this is how I type an address, this is how I go back and forth. If I want to use something in incognito mode, or if I want to keep things private, how do I do it, right? But as a front end developer, when I say browsers and how do they work, I actually mean that what what runtime, JS runtime, right, with JavaScript is being executed, different browsers provide, what is their market share, right? so that when you're running you're developing a mobile app, or maybe you're developing a web app, you actually know that, okay, if my customer requires Google Chrome to be supported, then what all APIs are available in the Google Chrome? If you're using any array function, or if you're using any of the JavaScript API, is it available on Chrome or not? So these kind of browser specific peculiarity you should think of. Also, how do browsers work in terms of like when I'm typing a URL in the browser and pressing an enter, right? What actually browser is doing? It is downloading the HTML from somewhere, and then what it is doing with this HTML. There are various steps of these steps that are happening with the HTML that is coming to the browser. Browser is parsing them, browser is looking for the script tag, browser is also doing the rendering of the images, it is calculating the styles and all, right? So all of these things, they are actually fundamental things which as a front-end developer you should be familiar with, because this is something like nobody will teach you on the job. This is something, if you don't know, you'll have to like learn it hard way. So this is something when I became a UI developer, or I became a front end developer, I didn't know most of these things, because I came from an app development thing, and app doesn't require a browser to be like installed and all of those things, right? So I learned most of these things, especially about the internet, in a hard way. So this is why I added this entire dedicated slide on the internet about how it works, what is like HTTPS and hosting and various components of the internet that one should be aware of. Uh, the next thing that I've added in the roadmap is the languages of the web, right? So typically, any website or any web application, if you look at, right, it has three fundamental pieces. One is the HTML, another one is CSS, and the next one is JavaScript. So HTML is more of responsible for the structure of the website. That okay, where should be your head, where should be your body, where should be your footer, and all of those things. And then once you have set up the structure or the skeleton, you need to give it a good look and feel so it's visually appealing to the people. People will not say that, hey, this looks like a college project, instead of saying that, hey, this is a really beautiful app. So those sort of things. So you use CSS, which is more of with the presentation and presentation and appearance of the website. And then you talk about then the next language which comes into picture, which is sort of brain of the app, is called JavaScript. uh, JavaScript is mainly JavaScript is mainly added to any website to add the interactivity. So let's say if a user is clicking on a website, it should clicking on a button or something, it should show the appropriate message, or it should do something. It shouldn't be like that, okay, you have added the skeleton, you've added the skin, but when somebody is clicking on something, that is happening. Your users will complain that this web is broken. So these are like the fundamental languages of the web, which are required for more or less any web application you will develop. Cool. So let's talk about each of these languages in detail. Let's talk about the HTML first. Okay. So people often confuse HTML as a programming languages. HTML is not a programming language, it's more of a markup languages. So what do I mean by that is that you write your markups or your tags in HTML, and you don't give any you don't write any logic per se that, hey, if this is happening, do this, this is happening, do this. You simply give the instruction to the browser that I need a paragraph here. This is my p tag. Now you don't care about how browser is rendering the paragraph and all. So it's more of like a declarative language where you simply give the instruction to the browser. You don't worry much about the implementation of the browser. HTML is again responsible for the entire page structure, which is like defining where should go what should be the header, what should be the footer and all. And one interesting thing, or maybe I would say one good thing about HTML or in general web technology is that they are fault tolerant. What do I mean by fault tolerant is that, let's say if you're making a mistake, if you're writing a Java program, or maybe if you're writing some Python script and all, and if you have written something which is not very compiler friendly, then the compiler will complain that, hey, this is incorrect, this is correct, you need to fix this error before I can run the website, before I can run the program for you. While in terms of HTML, they are more fault tolerant. When I say that if you miss a tag or if you do something which is incorrect, browser will do its best to automatically fix it and run the web in the best possible way. But it's also being treated as a, like, it's also like looked down upon, because when you look at the fault tolerant part, sometimes you've accidentally removed something you don't know, and now your entire web is behaving in a weird way. So it's good for the beginner, but it's not good for the people who have a lot of experience, because sometimes, let's say, if editor did some formatting, or maybe some conflict have happened when they merge their changes with other person's changes, so all of those things. But in general, HTML basically is the language where you define the structure in a declarative way, and it's responsible for rendering whatever you need in terms of tag. Now, let's quickly talk about an HTML element. So these are like very basics, but I've added them as a part of roadmap, because most of the time you will be writing these steps only. So I'll quickly skim over all of these things. Since you will be learning about them in more details in your actual master classes and all. Cool. So HTML elements are basically like, there are a couple of types of element. Some are like non-replace type of elements, some are replace type of elements, some are void elements. So these types are basically determined by the type of content they render. For example, non-replaced element render their content as it is. Like if I'm using an anchor tag or maybe a heading tag, right? It will render whatever the text inside it as it is. Replaced element more of like they don't have their content as it is. Their content is coming from somewhere else. For example, if it's an image tag, its content will come from a an image URL, right? If it's an input text, its content will come from like whatever user is typing. Similarly, there are void elements who doesn't have any conflict content, but they do add some of the they offer some of the functionality. For example, a line break tag, right, or maybe a horizontal rule tag. So these are the tags which simply adds a line break or add a horizontal rule, but they don't have any content inside this when you define these elements. Now, the next thing about an HTML element is the attribute. So an element actually takes some of the attributes which you pass to it, and it defines or maybe controls the behavior of the attribute. It also provides some metadata about it. So for example, let's say this anchor tag in this slide, if it has an ID attribute, then that ID attribute will uniquely identify this entire element on the page. Then there are some elements which are meant for the appearance, like, and they have their own style sheet associated with it. What do I mean by that? For example, button element will have its own styles associated with it. H1 element will look different, like that. Where do their styles come from? These styles called user agent styles, which are specific to the browser and the OS on which they are being used for. So, for example, the button you are seeing on the Mac OS and the button you will see on the Windows OS will be completely different on the two different websites. So these are called user agent styles and the appearance of the element. Uh, Now let's quickly talk about the document structures. How does an HTML document look like? Correct. So typically an HTML document structure is done done in such a way that it follows all the best practices. Although browsers don't enforce any structure, because as I told you earlier, browsers are more fault tolerant in terms of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. But it is recommended to follow this structure to achieve the desired behavior, because if you don't follow this structure, then you might get some of the unintended behavior which you didn't want. Cool. So typically you have a doc type on at the top of your HTML document. Then you'll have an HTML tag which is being called as the root of the element, which will provide the content language, which is like, okay, this website is in English or is it in Hindi, and all of those metadata. Then you'll probably have your head tag, which will contain some of the meta tags, which will define the character encoding. So character encoding is something that decides what kind of characters your website use. Does it use emojis, Does it use Chinese letters and all of those things, right? So these are the encodings which we tell the browser so it can render all of the content properly. And then you'll have your document title, some viewport metadata, where like if somebody's opening your website on a mobile app or maybe on a desktop, how do you want to handle certain things? It can have many other things like assets, style sheet, fonts, and all. So as a front-end developer, the basic structure, right, that every app has as a high-level overview, that in my opinion you should be familiar with, so that you know that okay, every application, whether you will develop or you will debug or you will work upon, right, which is an existing one, it will have certain structure, and you also have a starting point rather than having a blank slate. You will know that okay, these are the things which every application has, these are the best practices which industry is following, and this is something I should also follow as a UI developer. Cool. So now the next thing comes into picture after after understanding the structure of the HTML called semantic HTML. So what does semantic HTML means is basically it means that writing an HTML that has a meaning. What do I mean by that? So typically, like if you have done some of the UI development, you will see that there are typically a div tag, there is typically a span tag, and there are many other tags like h1, h2, h3, and all of those tags, right? The problem is that these tags are often overused. Their actual usage is something else. They should be used for something like when you don't know what meaning to give this particular content, right? So cementing actually means that something that has a meaning associated with it. Uh, People all the time use div span to uh, structure their HTML, while there are lots of semantic HTML. For example, if you're looking at a website that is having an articles and a section and a header and a footer, you will probably use article section tag and header footer tags, right? Instead of using just plain old semantic tags, instead of using just plain old div and span. Why do we need to use semantic thing? The one very important thing is it improves the accessibility of the website. So accessibility is something that defines that how your website is accessible to the people who are physically challenged. For example, somebody is using keyboard navigation to navigate through your app because they can't see things clearly. Then if you're not using semantic HTML, the whole experience of your web will go for a toss. Uh, Another important thing is semantic HTML helps a lot in terms of search engine ranking. Uh, if you're not able to use any tag which it is giving semantical meaning. For example, let's say if you have a button but you want to use an image as a button because this is some UX or something with respect to the design that a button has to be used there, right? Then you can leverage the role attribute to give meaning to the button. Tell the browser that use a div or an image tag there. Tell the browser that the role of this particular element is a button, so that anybody who is using a screen reader or maybe an assistive technology, right? The screen reader will say that, hey, this is not an image, this is a button. You can interact with this particular element. What else semantic tags like which you can use or which are being used day to day is like header, navigation, section, article, aside, footer, etc. Okay, cool. So now the next thing is about HTML is some of the advanced concept, right? So again, as a roadmap, I'm giving you enough topics or things which you should learn to become a front-end developer. I'll not deep dive into this because that will be out of the scope of this webinar. So similarly, some of the advanced topics as in UI developer, which you should be familiar with, which will help you in a journey from 1 to 10. So far, I was talking about the journey from 0 to 1, where you learn basic things about HTML. Now, all of these concepts will help you to reach the next level. So one way or another way, any web app you develop or anything you develop will always require some input from the user, right? And typically on the web, you take input using form submission, using form, and you have a button or you have an input bar, and then you submit a form. So typically, learn about form validations, learn about how to develop a form, how to submit it, how to validate the form before submit it, right? Because most of the times, maybe intentionally or unintentionally, user is typing something which they didn't mean to, right? And that will cause a lot of issues. So learn how to validate a form, then showing appropriate messages, right? That if, let's say, a field is mandatory, how do you display an error message to the user in a more meaningful way? And then accessibility of the form, that how do you make your entire form accessible? So let's say if I'm typing something and pressing enter, what my form is doing, is it submitting the form, is it switching to the next input field, can I switch between fields using like tab or keyboard? And then use appropriate colors for the form. For example, uh, if a user is a color blind, right, and you have set the disabled color as gray color or something, and black color is your default state, then both colors will have the same state for the people who cannot distinguish between different colors, right? So for them, this submit button will always look disabled. They will not be even able to figure it out. So uh, learn about the accessibility of the form, especially in terms of like validation, disabling a particular control and all. Then learn about HTML media. So HTML media is something nowadays a website is really built on just like text and some element. It will either have some video element, it will either have some audio element, or it will either have an image, right? So how do you add a video to a website? How do you add images to a website? Correct? All of those things, these are like basic things. So although I've added them in an advanced concept, because but the moment you talk about video or audio or maybe an image, a lot of other things comes into picture. So it will help you a lot to like understand the nitty-gritty of how the media works on the web. So this is something you should be familiar with. And then SVG and canvas element. So typically a canvas element is not very used. It is not used quite often, though I have used in one of my previous companies, where we were building an asset management tool where printers were mapped on the floor. So my career started with canvas element only, and then I explored other pieces of web development. But SVG is something which you should be familiar with, because most of the time the icons which you will use on your app, or maybe some of the graphics which your design team will give you, most of the time they will be in the SVG format. So this is something you should be comfortable with. And then learn about DOM. So document object model is basically a tree of your entire HTML structure. What do I mean by that? So when you define a doc type tag, when you define a HTML tag, when you define body tag and all of those things, right? This entire HTML structure is represented in the form of the elements in a tree, and that tree is called document object model. It's basically an API, I would say, a way to manipulate the current HTML you have. So for example, let's say you want to conditionally hide or show something when user does something. For example, if a if you're submitting a form for income tax, and if your income tax slab is maybe like the upper one, right, 10 lakh plus, then you want to show a particular control, correct? Then how do you manipulate all of those things? So document object model is basically, it basically helps you with all of those things. Then the next thing which you should learn, in my opinion, is the search engine optimization. That if somebody is doing a Google search of your website, where does their site appear? How does their site look? I mean, if I'm typing, let's say, smellycode.com on Google, right? Then does my site come first or somebody else's site come first? How can I improve the ranking of my website? All of those things. Then there's something called social media optimization. I'm not sure how many of you have heard about it, but social media optimization is something where, let's say, if a friend of yours is sharing your website's link, right, then Facebook or Twitter is will show a particular card, correct? That it will, sometimes it will show a beautiful, for some sites you might have seen a beautiful card, for some sites you'll just see a plain link only, it doesn't show anything, it just show a title and all, right? So this is called social media optimization. So this is typically handled via open graph data. So in your HTML's meta tag, you add this open graph data where you tell Facebook or you tell Twitter that, okay, if somebody sharing this site on your platform, then what you need to show, you show this image, you show this text as a description, you show this title, and all of those things. So all of these optimizations are called social media optimizations. So these are some of the advanced concepts. Again, if you don't learn them, should be fine, but it's good to know them, because definitely one way or another you will need them in your day-to-day life or in your day-to-day work. Cool. So this was so far for the HTML. Let's talk about CSS now. So,
So,
yeah,
Hitesh, there are some questions. So maybe we'll take them before we move to CSS part.
sure, sure,
Okay.
sure.
Great. So the social media optimization was news to me, because I always wonder when you share some link, right? Sometimes it just goes as a link, and sometimes it comes with something. It's very interesting that we need to have one of data associated with it. So let me see. There are some questions have come. Some of them are basics, but still let us answer them.
Sure.
Okay. Yeah, there's a question about in past, front end means only HTML, CSS, JS, but now we have to learn framework databases, etc. Why so? Sushant is asking question.
You don't have to learn databases for front end development. You will need HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and one framework at least in your portfolio. The reason I'm telling you at least one framework is because in the industry, especially where the world is moving very fast, right? You don't want yourself to spend a lot of time figuring out how to do the things how to solve a problem which has already been solved, right? So typically what a framework do, a framework does the job which is already, like, which should be done on a repetitive basis. For example, let's say if I update my JavaScript variable and I want my UI to be updated immediately, right? Then a library like React or a framework like Angular, right? They will take care of all of those things, right? So frameworks are needed must, but database, I don't think you need to learn any database. I learned database when, like, I had almost like 3+ years of experience, and when I actually need to work on some of the database. So one of the misconception that people have about especially the industry right now is that everybody knows everything, but that's not the true. Everybody is figuring out how to do things, and one really good thing about software engineering uh, is that it gives you the luxury to learn at the job, right? Because it treats your learning at a job as a work only. It doesn't treat you like that, hey, you're learning at a job, you're not working actually. So just learn the fundamentals about the front end development. All of the other pieces are good to have as or a bonus, I would say.
Okay, great. Sushant, hope this answered your question. Even we get into this often the debate of full stack web development, and you should know everything about everything, or something about everything, or a lot about some things, right? We are the depth versus breadth. I think it is always a debatable, especially in the web development area where things keep evolving. By the time you figure it out, things move on, right? But as you said, the right way to approach should be learn the fundamentals clearly, and then things become as you start working. I think that's a very nice way to put it. And there's another question again. So it sounds like a basic question here. Can you know the fundamental difference between HTTP and HTTPS from Govardhan?
So the fundamental difference between HTTP and HTTPS is the security. So when you're transferring something over the network, right? If you're not using HTTPS, then any man in the middle can actually intercept your request to read the payload. But if you're using HTTPS, there's an encryption in between, and they will see the payload, but it will be encrypted. They will not be able to decipher it unless and until they know the private key of it. So this is why the SSL certificate come into picture. I'll talk about all of these things more when we'll talk about web security in the later slides, that what does it mean, what you should know about it. But yeah, this is the fundamental difference.
Great, because it's become very integral these days, because the aspects like performance and security, nobody's going to give you a separate example saying the separate requirement saying that, hey, my site should be secure. That's something fundamental, fundamental requirement, right?
Yeah,
so you need to build on top of it.
Yeah, so these are called NFRs, Jaya, which are called non-functional requirements. So like your site has to be performant. Nobody will come and tell you that, hey, this site should be performant, right? So, so these are NFRs, which are like implicit requirements that has to be part of your app as default.
Right. Having other aspect. No, I'm not an expert like you to share my perspective, but just that I have observed couple of things, Hitesh, and also I thought I'll share it with the participants as well. So when we work with a lot of developers, they kind of look into the functional part, making the look and feel of it, and they want to make the site, the accessibility or the UI part of it well. But sometimes they kind of overlook on both aspects. For example, the security aspect and also the performance aspect. Now, I burned my fingers many times by working with developers. The page looks great, but it takes probably 20 seconds to load, right? By the time 20 seconds to load, Google will kick you out of the search engine, right? It's not going to rank your website. That is one part of it, right? Second thing, they leave so much loopholes in the coding, especially with the help of plugins and everything, right? Multiple times, at least last in a few years I have seen, right, our own site, luckily not WSA website, the other website, emergency website, I think it got hacked 3 to 4 times, and people will put all sort of nonsense when they hack the content and things like that, right? So the other part which I want to share to the participant is, it's not only that we make the website look and feel and good, right? These aspect what Hitesh also stated, NFRs, like non-functional requirements, especially responsiveness. And today, when we say the young population of India, right? They are mobile first, right? So everything should be mobile friendly, right? Building a web page which is responsive. I think that we'll be talking in subsequent slides, right? So my experience, I see many times developers don't get it. They believe that putting up the blocks and putting the style is what great thing is all about. But at the end of the day, looking it from the customer perspective and user perspective plays a very important role. Okay, so that's my 2 cents of gyan, okay, whatever you can say. By the way, guys, India won the match, 192 for 3, 30.3 overs. I think it's
nice.
right. Big win for India. Let us say, I think even the run rate, they look better. So there's another question. Anurag is asking, can we get the slide on our email? Yes, we do send. Hitesh has already shared us. We will be sharing along with the video. We'll also sharing you the slide. And then there's a question from Vaishnav. Because of using HTML, CSS, JS code is larger and bigger than using a framework. He's talking about the code size. By using the framework, is it going to become bigger?
So that's something I'll talk about in the build tools, right? That when you use a framework, what sort of build tools you have, right? So just to give you a heads up, or just to summarize that, when you use a framework, you typically don't load it using a script tag or something. You will have your entire tooling setup in place, correct? So what that tooling setup will do is, right, it will actually tree shake your entire bundle. So tree shaking means that remove all the unused code and only include those pieces of the code in the bundle which my application is using. So even if you are using a framework or a library, right, which is maybe big in size, you will actually use the code which is being required by your application, not all the code of the framework. Now, one interesting question might ask, like one counter question might be there is that even though I just need a hello world, right? And if I'm using a framework, it will definitely blow out your size, right? But then I would say that if you're having just an hello world application, why do you need a framework? Correct? So you will use typically a framework in an application which is a complex, right? In a complex application, if you will not use a framework, then what will happen that you will have a lot of boilerplate code. When I say boilerplate, it means repetitive code, and then eventually your app will grow and you will not be able to even purge that code. So just to answer that question is that framework definitely blow to your side, but they also add a lot of value, which is often overlooked.
Okay, great. I think one last question before we proceed. We are using jQuery, React, Angular, etc. Is it necessary to learn about DOM in depth?
So generally, when you're using any framework, you don't need to learn DOM in depth. But let's say if you're not doing some sort of complex DOM manipulation or something like React, right, where you typically don't do that. But as like it again depends. This is why I added these concepts in an advanced concept, right? Because you need to you'll probably learn them when you're doing your work. But the basic DOM manipulation everybody should be familiar with, because let's say if you're getting interviewed at Myntra or maybe any other company, right? So sometimes like they give you machine coding problems. Sometimes when you're in the simple, like maybe in an interview, they will ask you the fundamental questions, right? Because if you're using jQuery or any other framework, right, then they are also internally doing DOM manipulation only. So the thing is that, let's say if you're developing a library which is being used across your organization, or maybe you just need a custom solution which is very small and you don't want to use a framework for that, will you be able to develop that solution or not, right? So typically when you have rough idea about things that, okay, this is how it should be done, which like in a philosophical way it's called first principles, right? So when your first principles are right, then you don't need to worry about this. And these first principles are actually derived from the fundamentals of any language or technology you use.
Great. Thanks, Hitesh. I would let you proceed. I'll pause you later. Please proceed.
Sure. Yeah. Cool. So once you have developed your site, right, after that you need to make it look beautiful, right? And that's where CSS comes into picture. So like HTML, CSS is not a programming languages. It's not a markup languages either. I would call it as a style sheet language, right? What I typically like internal joke with my friends is that like if I'm writing a CSS, I'm probably doing programming with boxes, because in CSS everything is a box. Cool. So CSS is again like responsible for styling the web content which you typically have. And as we discussed in HTML, right, the CSS is also declarative in nature. What does it mean? It means that, let's say you say that make this paragraph red. It means browser will make it red. You don't have to worry about it. How browser will make it red? And again, CSS is also fault tolerant. So if you are giving some incorrect values to a property or something, uh, it will not break your website. It will simply ignore whatever it cannot understand. Cool. So now let's talk about the next thing in CSS, which we will call box model. So as I said earlier, again, CSS is all about programming with boxes. Now, when we talk about box model, there are a bunch of things that comes into picture. Again, having this mental model that everything is a box helps you a lot in terms of the overall development. Now, how do you control the box model? You control the box model typically using the box sizing property. It can have two values: contents box and content box and border box. Uh, so basically, content box and border box are one of the two properties that determine that how your browser will behave when you give this property. So if you look at this diagram, right, your content box is the actual box where your content is placed, and then you have a padding, border, outline, box shadow, and margin and all, right? So when you give content box, and if you give a browser, if you tell the browser that, okay, use this box sizing as content box and the width and height is 100 px or maybe some px, and then if you add any border, browser will add all the width and height, and the overall height and width of the box will increase if you set it to content box, because it will depend on the padding, the border that has been applied to the element. But if you use border box, it will accumulate everything. It will restrict the height to 100 px regardless of how much padding or width you have applied. So these are like some of the properties or fundamentals, I would say, when you're working with CSS you should be familiar with, because those are something that you will debug a lot and you will encounter issue with them day to day. Another aspect, another interesting thing about box model is the padding, right? And margin. So people often get confused when to use padding, when to use margin, right? So I use the simple thumb rule that if I want to push content inside the box, I'll use the padding. If I want to give my box a breathing room, I'll use margin. And it has helped. This thumb rule has helped me a lot, especially in terms of like taking care of the issues like margin collapse and all. And then like if you want to add border, you can simply use the border tag. Border is also being used as a border radius to make box circular and all. Although the box will remain as a box only, it will just look as a circular box if you give a border radius to it. Cool. The next thing I want like especially the aspiring front-end developer to understand is the CSS selectors. So CSS selectors are basically the selectors that select a specific element on a CSS on a page. So they are basically, let's say if you have a long HTML page, right? Now you want to style a particular element which is somewhere maybe in a list or somewhere down in the footer. How do you select it? So that's where CSS selectors shines. Now there are simple selectors where you can use the star, or you can use the type of the element, like I want to style all para element, or you can define a CSS class, just like defining this example as my CSS rule, and then use that class. Or you can use an ID selector if the element has an ID attribute. Uh, then there are attribute selectors where, let's say, if you define an attribute, maybe something like href is equal to this, then you use attribute selector. Then you have pseudo classes, right? And then you have pseudo elements. So pseudo classes are something like where your element is being hovered, it is active, it is disabled. Pseudo elements are the extra element which are added by browser for some of the elements called before and after. So you style those. So as a front-end developer, you should be familiar with these. Uh, then there are complex selectors where you want to select maybe the last child in a list, which is maybe having some particular style and all. Then you use complex selectors. Another interesting thing about CSS is called the cascade. So the whole full form of CSS itself is that cascade styling sheet or something, correct? Now, what is a cascade? So basically, when you write CSS, you will have your big file, or maybe you will have a bunch of CSS. All of them will be added in the browser when your page is running, right? So you will have a lot of conflicting CSS. Now, cascade is an algorithm that solves that conflict when multiple CSS are applied to the same element. Now, there is a complete fine-grained algorithm, how it is being solved and all. Uh, it's up to the browser. The implementation is more or less same. So you have your default user agent style, then you have your custom user styles which are defined by you, or maybe users set up their settings. For example, if I'm using dark mode, then by default, most of the applications or website I use will have the dark mode as a default style. Then some of the CSS which you have authored, then some CSS which are authored with this. So this entire skill goes from this left to right. So who has the least specific and who is the most specific, that will get applied. So this browser implements the algorithm internally, and it takes care of deciding what is the final rule it should apply. Now, in terms of the whole cascade algorithm, it is actually split into four distinct stages. So the very first stage decides that where should be the position and order of the appearance, like where is your CSS, the actual CSS rule set which you have written is appearing in the entire source code. If it is appearing on the top, it will be overridden by any property which is on the bottom. The next thing is the selector specificity, how specifically you're selecting a particular element. For example, let's say you're selecting an element which is inside a body tag, then inside a list, and then inside the list it is the last element, right? Then it will probably get more preferences than other elements. Then from where your CSS is coming from, correct? Is it your CSS, it is browser CSS, or is it your inline CSS? Correct. And then the important rule. So this important rule actually dictates everything, like whatever has been done by the previous algorithm or the rule, just override and everything and apply the current rule when this dictate is when the important rule is being applied. So this is how the cascade algorithm works. Uh, the very next thing which I believe you should learn about CSS is the layout part. In my opinion, any UI app you develop, whether you're developing for the mobile app or whether you're developing for the desktop app or you're developing an AMP web, layout is always the king. If your layout is right, you will most likely get everything correct. Uh, in terms of responsiveness, in terms of showing and hiding a particular element on a particular breakpoint. So CSS provides layout on all the axes. You can lay out an element on the Z axis, you can lay out an element on X axis, you can do a Y axis, you can also do transform and do some 3D transformation for the layout. A bunch of properties that determines like how a box should be, as we talked about, right? So whether this box should be like it should be inline or it should like cover the complete row is controlled by the display properties. Display property also dictates the behavior of a box's children, like if it is set to flex or something. There are other layout properties like flexbox and grid. These layout properties became very popular in like last couple of years because they were missing from CSS from a really long time. What people used to do earlier was they were using float all the time, or maybe just table component all the time to create the layouts. While these were not the right tools. This is why Flexbox and Grid became very popular. So you typically use Flexbox when you want to create one-dimensional layout. And if you need multiple dimensions, you will use Grid. Grid is relatively complex. Most likely you will use Flexbox all the time. Grid you will use typically on a page level container, or maybe you're showing an actual grid rather than uh, like some divs, like some rows which are like using flexbox. Cool. So just like we discussed in HTML part, some of the advanced concept that we need to like that a front-end aspiring front-end developers or anybody who is looking for a job, right, should be familiar with, or at least have a rough idea about it. So very first thing is about responsive web design. So as I said, if your layout is right, then you just need to figure out that, okay, now this is my layout. How do I show and hide the things conditionally? So people typically use like media queries, or they define macro layout or micro layout. So what is macro layout? It's a layout which you define on a page level, and micro layout is something which you define on a component level. So for example, let's say if you're working for Myntra, you're defining a product card, right? Your product card will probably have a micro layout because it will depend on the size of the container it is being used. While your macro layout will decide the whole site's structure, how your overall site should look like and all. Then there are a bunch of logical properties. Logical properties is something which is a recent addition in the web. It was missing piece, and I really wanted it when I was actually doing the web development in my initial days. So I'll explain briefly what is logical properties. So typically, uh, like all of our devices where we use English and all, right, we go from left to right. But let's say if somebody is using a laptop and Urdu is the default language, they go the reverse direction, right? They go from right to left. Now, what happens that, let's say if you have given padding left and padding right, now if somebody is using a different layout direction, right, then all of your these styles will change, and your site will look very ugly, correct? So logical properties became very popular where you don't talk about left and right, you talk about start and end. You say that this is my padding start, this is my padding end, this is my block start, this is my block end, and browser takes care of it based on the language orientation. So when your site is being viewed in a language direction which is like right to left, you don't have to worry about it, or you don't have to flip your variables, right? It will naturally take care of this. So this became very popular, and I think gradually industry is adopting this pattern. Then you learn about CSS variables, which are again like they help you to have design tokens so that you can quickly change your values on the fly. Then again, responsive images and videos, and animation is good to have. It's not must to have, but some you should be able to figure out how to like use the basic CSS transition and all. Then CSS also comes with media features. Now, this is something quite interesting, right? That, okay, how do I know if somebody is using a dark theme or a light theme? How do I know what is the device orientation? So media query provides a lot of these features like orientation or preferred color scheme and all, so that you can apply appropriate style based on various conditions. For example, if a user is using dark mode, you will show the dark variant of your website. If a user is using light mode, you will show probably light variant of a website. So these are some of the features you should get yourself familiar with. Uh, Now let's move to JavaScript part. So so as in the last few years, I've realized that software is eating the world, and JavaScript is something that is eating the software. Correct? Now this meme actually describes it in pretty well way. Like you name any pillar of the engineering or software development area, and you will find some part of JavaScript in it, whether it's front end, whether it's back end, whether it's mobile app, whether it's desktop app, whether it's machine learning. you have JavaScript everywhere. So there is no debate in that whether you should learn JavaScript or not. Uh, it should be in your portfolio. You should master it, or maybe at least get some expertise in this, because this will help you a lot in the longer run. Now, typically, again, just like HTML, CSS, what are the primary responsibilities of JavaScript, right? So it adds interactivity to your web pages. JavaScript can actually run in any environment which provides a JS runtime. So earlier JavaScript used to run only in the browser environment. Now with the JS runtime like V8 and all, it can run in Node.js and any other environment like Cloudflare workers and all. JavaScript can run seamlessly, and even in the React Native environment where you give a sandboxed environment to run your JavaScript code, and it will be able to run. How who evolves JavaScript, or who decides JavaScript, that what features should go in JavaScript or not? So that is completely taken care by ECMAScript language specification. So earlier what used to happen, that let's say if Chrome wants to add a feature to JavaScript, they will add it. If Mozilla wants to add it, they will add it. If Apple wants to add it, they will add it. Because of that, the life of developers became painful, and that's why you see that there are so many jokes about Internet Explorer and Edge and all about the web development, right? Because nobody was following any standard. Then all of these groups or the open source community decided to create a standard or a specification for the language, that any browser that is implementing the JavaScript engine or any JavaScript runtime will follow these standards which are defined by ECMAScript. And this is why JavaScript became very popular, because all of the browser vendors started following this specification, and then it became stable also. Otherwise, I remember when I started my career, uh, I was using some function like basic functions like number.to string or something, and we had to support IE, and that function was not there at all. So people used to use techniques like polyfill and shim, where you override the default behavior or you provide a behavior if it is not present. So those kind of techniques we used to use. Another often confusion that people have is that Java script is related to Java in some way. It's not related at any all. When Brendan Nick at Netscape developed JavaScript, he actually called it live script, but their marketing team decided to call it JavaScript because Java was very popular on that time. And because of that, all of this confusion is still happening, like especially for the people who are like starting their career in the front end development. And one funny thing about JavaScript, that it is full of footguns, or I would say idiosyncrasies. What do I mean by that is that there are peculiar behavior or esoteric behavior that you will encounter that no other language has. And JavaScript is full of those behaviors. And there are ways to avoid this, and you can always avoid them. Uh, I'll in the later slides, I'll tell how to avoid these behaviors so that you don't waste your time figuring out how to do some basic stuff. Uh, then, like, let's talk about variables. Now, every programming language is variable. Now, since CSS and HTML were not programming languages, HTML at least didn't have variable, but CSS had variable in some format. While JavaScript is a programming language, or I would say, to be more specific, it's a scripting language. It's full with variable. It has its own variable. It has own convention of defining variable. You typically use let, where, const. Then the way variables work in JavaScript are different from the way they typically work in other languages. So there's a concept of hoisting and all. How does it work? You should be familiar with that. One of the most confusing part about variable is their scope in JavaScript. So unlike Java or other languages, their scope starts from where it is defined. While variable scope in JavaScript has multiple levels. It has block level scope, it has function level scope, it has global level scope. Luckily, with let and const, the variable scope has become it has been defined a lot. Otherwise, earlier it was a mess. If you define something with where, it will probably it will purely depend on the environment where you're defining. If you're just defining in a script tag, it will probably become a global variable, and it can easily collide with any other variable. Now, that's something at least has been properly solved now. Uh, Data types. So JavaScript has some primitive data types like string, undefined, number, begin, null, and symbol. So these are like basic data types that JavaScript has. typecasting. So unlike other languages where you declare a variable, you define its type, JavaScript doesn't have that kind of convention. It has a dynamically typed language. What does it mean? It means that the type of a variable is defined by what you're assigning to it, and you can always change it on the the value on the fly, and the type will change. So it's not statically typed, it's dynamically typed, and the type of a variable is defined during runtime. Now, how the typecasting happens? Most of the time it happens implicit, but you can be explicit about it. If you want to convert something into a string, you can use toString, or if you want to convert a number into, if you want to convert a string into number, you can use parseInt and all. What all data structures JavaScript has? So just like any other languages, it comes up with some basic data structure. These are like typically format or a way to organize your data, I would say. JavaScript has a lot of primitives like or inbuilt data structures. Some of the inbuilt data structures are keyed collections where you have a key value pair. So map is one of them. Then you have a set also where you can directly access it, which uniquely stores the value and all. Then you have weak map and weak set. These are sort of advanced data structure. So they typically work in a way that, let's say if you have a map and you're using some key to access the value in a map. Now, let's say if your key is garbage collected, there's no way for you to access that value, right? But the map will still hold that value. A weak map is sort of having these things as loose. So if your key is garbage collected, the value from the map will also be garbage collected. So this make a lot of perf improvement, especially for the people who are developing games and all, or maybe when your application is being continuously used for some hours, right? You probably want to use probably want the stale variables to be garbage collected, which were in your map. So similar to set works in a similar way. Then you have index collection where you have array, typed array, and then you have structured data. So structured data is like simple JSON. So in JavaScript, everything is a JSON, which is like simple JavaScript object notations. So JSONs are first-class citizens. What do I mean by that is you can pass around here and there however you want to do them. Then you have like just like any other languages, you have all sort of operators, control flow loops and all. One weird thing about JavaScript is that it has two equality operators. One is triple equal, another one is double equal. So the second one is called is loosely equal. The first one is called is strictly equal. The reason these two exist because when Brandon developed JavaScript, he didn't give it enough thought, and now after it has matured a lot, right? People require that we need to be more strict with in terms of what we are checking. So the loosely equal will do typecast, will do the value conversion and everything, while strict equal will exactly check the type and the references. Then you have the loop and the iterations, which are typically your for loop, while loop and all. Then you have your control flow where your if statement, else statement and all of these things go. Then you have your JS functions in JavaScript, which are again like typical programming language feature. Every programming language have where your function, where you define your function to reuse some form of code which you want to use. Now the thing about JavaScript is that it has so many types of function. It has plain function, it has arrow function, it has immediately invoked function, and then these functions also have different sort of weird parameters. Like some functions have argument object, which is not recommended to use. Then the scope and the function stack, right? So how does the scope inside a function work? So it sort of uses lexical scoping. Then there is a closures, which is defined, which remembers the environment where it is created, and then the typical recursion. One good thing about JavaScript is that the functions are also first-class citizen. It means that you can also pass function as a parameter to another function. Then there are lots of built-in functions, just like string dot to string, number dot something, maybe to fixed point or something. Then we have some JS advanced concept. Just like we discussed for HTML and CSS, we'll discuss some of the JS advanced concept here also. Again, you don't need to learn them, but it's good to know them. So JavaScript has two kind of mode of execution. One is called strict mode, another one is called non-strict mode. So non-strict mode is a bit sloppy, where if you don't define a variable, it will work fine. You might end up having incorrect values or maybe null values. So this is why everybody recommends to use strict values, because it enforces some restricted variant that has to be applied for your JavaScript to avoid unintended behavior. So that's what I was talking about, that a lot of the peculiarities that JavaScript has, right, they can easily be avoided if you're using this script mode. It also does some optimization in terms of code execution. So strict mode is slightly faster than non-strict mode. Then there's a this keyword. So the this keyword itself works in a weird way in JavaScript. It depends on the context of invocation of a function, unlike other languages where it depends on with which object you're calling a function. So again, these kind of specific JavaScript behavior that you will not typically find in any other language. Then how do you have asynchronous behavior in JavaScript? Because JavaScript by nature is a single threaded. What do I mean by that is everything is running on a one UI thread, and browser takes care of doing things asynchronously. We cannot create threads just like we do in any other language, right? So asynchronous JavaScript is typically handled by callback promises, async await keyword. And then how do you make a network call in JavaScript? So you have your fetch or Ajax APIs where you simply give an endpoint, you give appropriate headers and HTTP methods you want to use, and then you get your data. These are some of the pretty advanced concepts like iterators and generators, which basically defines a protocol about how you can traverse the values of a particular object, or how you can iterate over a particular collections using for of loop. Uh, and generators are basically the functions which help you to read value from iterator protocol, iterators using yield keyword and all. Then the module concepts in JavaScript. So modules are basically things which you use to modularize your code so that you can refactor them easily and all. Then browser dev tools, that how do you inspect the element and all of those things. Cool. So now let's quickly talk about framework. So typically people don't need a framework when they are doing their personal project or something, but in general, you should have good understanding of HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and all before you switch to any framework. Framework often carry a lot of environment along with it, and you have to pay taxes for that, right? So be careful with what framework or what tools you're introducing to your team, because everybody has to learn it. It will stick with you forever, and all of those things. But in general, especially when you're working in a software company, you will most of the time work with a framework. You will not directly work with plain CSS, HTML, and JavaScript unless and until you're working on a legacy software. So far, whatever we have discussed was from for the journey of 0 to 1. From here onwards, everything we will discuss is from a journey of 1 to 10. Cool. So let's talk about CSS framework. The problem which I have often seen people facing is that as your CSS grow, you struggle a lot with maintenance and all of those things, right? So that's where framework shines. Uh, they help you maintain your CSS in such a better way that you don't have to worry about all of the specificity issue. You don't have to use import, and you don't have to worry about what specific selectors you use. Some of the popular framework are like Bootstrap, Tailwind, and all. There are various patterns to use CSS, uh, and there are some preprocessors also. So for example, let's say if there's a latest CSS features which CSS specification has decided to roll it out, but it's not available in almost all the browsers. So you would probably use some of the CSS preprocessors to add these features using JavaScript or some variant of CSS for you in the browsers which do not support them. Then there are some convention to write scalable and modular CSS. One of my favorite is the block element modifier, which is typically that you define a block first where your element is residing, then you define the element, then you define a modifier. So for example, header and for example, button will be my block, and then button text will be my element, and then button modifier will be my actual, whether this button is primary or secondary, those kind of thing. Then you have the JavaScript frameworks and library. So this is something like I always tell people, right? That the with the pace JavaScript is moving, it's quite surprising because almost every week a new framework comes into picture, and that's what I was also talking about. That be careful with whatever framework you're learning. Don't let the shine blind you. Always do your homework before you use any of the framework. because typically what I hear from my colleagues is that they are having framework fatigue. That is like keeping up with the frameworks which are coming up. So, but there are some of the frameworks or libraries that I recommend you should start exploring, which is like React.js again, because it's very popular, being used across the industry. And if you want to get a job, I think React, there are so many React openings right now, so the React should probably help you. Then there are frameworks like Vue, Angular, Svelte, and all. Svelte is a really new framework. They all have their pros and cons. So you should at least have familiarity with them. Uh, cool. So once you've developed your app, how do you ensure that everything is working fine? And that's where testing comes into picture. So there are lots of there are different types of testing. Like there are some type of testing which you manual versus automation. Some companies have dedicated profile for manual testers, and some companies have dedicated profile for automation tester, and some companies the developer who is writing the code or developing the app will be responsible for everything, so end to end. But they are typically, from the automation or from the development point of view, there are a bunch of testings which you should get yourself familiar with, which is unit testing, integration testing, functional testing. And how do you do this testing is there are tools like Jest, Ytest, and all. So these are like really useful tools which can help you. Then once you have tested your app, there are some tools which helps you to package your app, or maybe there are some tools which helps you to manage your app's dependencies, right? Which are very popular. So one is the Node Package Manager, which is often referred as NPM. NPM has a lot of issues in terms of how it deals with file system and all, and some security vulnerabilities. There's a performant NPM which at least takes care of managing the dependencies, and then there's Yarn. Yarn is developed by Facebook. It gained a lot of traction last year, and it is slightly more secure than NPM. Then I was talking about the build tools again. So as we were discussing, right, that will it increase my bundle size and all of those things. So there are a lot of module bundler tools like White, ES Build, Webpack, Rollup, Parcel, and all. They will take care of everything for you, especially when you're building your tools, especially when you're building your app in terms of tree shaking and all of those things. Then there are some task runners which will help you do boring repetitive tasks. For example, every time you make a change, you want your site to reload, right? So these task runners will take care of this, and they are typically done via npm scripts, or like many scripts or many other tools which you can install locally. Then you have linters and formatters. So linters and formatters, you can think of it as a tools which enforces structure for your code, or a style guide which you want to enforce, so that everybody who is writing the code in your project will follow the same convention. For example, if you're using variable name as a camel case, and you want your team, or whatever the convention your team has settled upon, right, whether you use variable case or snake case, use that condition, enforce that convention everywhere, and you're sorted. So linters and formatters are such of those tools. Then version control system. So version control system, again, like it's for the people who are looking for a job. So typically when you work with your code and you want to share it with somebody, right? And a non-conventional way would be like zip it and give it over email or put it in a Google Drive. A conventional way would be probably use some tool like Git, push it to a GitHub, then share the URL of your repo, add the person as a collaborator to your repo and all. So this is one use case of version control system. Another use case of version control system is to allowing you to how you track your changes, so that you can know that what all things have changed over the last like development. You can easily revert back your changes. You can keep committing all of your changes, so you have a timestamp and all of those things. So some of the popular version control systems are like Git and Apache Subversion. And then when you're using a tool, you need to push your code to somewhere, right, so that you can remotely access it also. So there are many tools like this called GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket, and all. Then once you've learned this part, these are like again advanced concept. So typically, especially when you're doing the MWeb development, you would probably want to ship less JavaScript and all. So that's where instead of rendering things on the client, you will do server-side rendering. What do I mean by that is, so typically you ship your JavaScript to the client, let browser figure out, let browser do all the parsing, all the do all of the all of the HTML generation and everything once the JavaScript is loaded. While on the server-side rendering, you typically populate the data into your HTML and you only ship the HTML, and then you hydrate your page by setting up the event listener and all of these things to make it fully interactive. If you're using React.js, there are a lot of options for server-side rendering, Next.js, Remix, and all. If you're using Angular, you can use Angular Universal. For Vue.js, there is a Next.js, and for Svelte, there is a SvelteKit. So again, these are all the advanced concept. This is why I'm skimming through it. But yeah, you should at least have some familiarity with it. And then web security basics, at least you should have some familiarity with the security basics, because as a developer, we do our best, but hackers are always maybe 10 steps away from us, right? Ahead from us, right? So we should always ensure that whatever we are shipping is always secure. So some of the security things which you should look into is CORS, HTTPS, then content security policies. And then there's a very popular community, Open Web Application Security Project. It's an online community project that makes all the content freely available in terms of security, what are best practices you follow. So you should look up for that. Then sometimes, let's say you have your web app and you simply want to convert it into a mobile app, right? So then you can leverage your progressive web app feature, which is popularized by Flipkart initially. It pushed Chrome a lot to develop that feature for one of their big billion day sales. But yeah, progressive web app are websites that are typically enhanced to be installed like native apps and all, so you can use them. One of the advantage of them, they are responsive, they work with many different screen sizes, they function like native app, just like a single code base, and they don't have to go to Play Store and App Store to be updated. And the maintenance cost is also very low. If you have an app, already have a progressive web app, because all you need is like HTML, CSS, React, and some environment which can actually run your app using whatever the browser sandbox environment that is needed. One interesting thing about progressive app is that they use service worker, which are background task runner, and they do advanced caching, provides offline support, send push notification, and all. So these are something you should consider it. And they also contain a manifest file which contains metadata about your app, like icon, appearance, description, colors, and all. If you're keen into mobile app development, you have lots of options. You have React Native, you have Expo. So if you're just getting started, you should use Expo because it's an abstraction on top of React Native. But if you are probably creating a fully fledged app and you want a lot of customizations, then you can go for React Native itself. Then there's an Ionic which uses web view based approach. So if your website is responsible and it works on MWeb, you can easily port it to the Ionic and have a app which gives you a look and feel of native. And if you want to do the actual universal development, then you do the Flutter part. Cool. So this was so far all the advanced concept. Now some of the interview tips I'll share, which I have personally come up, which I've learned over the year, which I generally prefer that a candidate to be, which I generally feel that the candidate should have done their homework before appearing in an interview. So one thing I typically find is that generally people don't research about the role, which is what role they are applying for, right? Whether it is a senior level role or a mid level role or an entry level role. What all mandatory skills are needed for this role is like React is must or is Angular must and all of those things, and what are good to have, right? Because sometimes the profile itself requires you to work on the Node.js, but you don't have an experience in Node.js. Then if it's a mandatory skill, probably the interview will ask you about Node.js related questions and you will not be able to answer them. Then research about the round, which is something that whether it's a problem solving round, whether it's a DSLGO round, or whether it's a machine coding round. If it's a machine coding round, do you need to do some setup before appearing in the interview? Are you allowed to use any framework or library? Is it a take home assignment? Will it require a working demo? All of those things, right? So do your research about the round and then research about the company itself. So sometimes people don't know what the company do, and they just appear in the interview, and when the company asks questions about maybe the company or about something that the company is specifically doing, right, they're not able to figure, they have no clue about it. So typically, some of the things which you should look for is the in which domain the company is, whether it's e-com, it's edtech, it's biotech and all, because the interview questions will depend on the domain which they typically work upon. Then what tech stack is being used in the company? Is it on the React? Is it using Angular? Or or does it have its own custom framework which they have not outsourced, open sourced yet? Then look for the other candidates' interview experiences with the company on forums like Glassdoor, LeetCode, and all. Then participate in mock interviews. Trust me, this technique works a lot. Do a mock interview with your friend. Do a sample test on LeetCode, HackerRank, or anywhere you want, because that's something which actually like builds your muscle memory, or maybe helps you recall things, or maybe helps you prepare better. And again, last and final point, be honest and seek help. If you are stuck somewhere, if you don't know about the round, talk to HR, read the job description. If you're stuck in the interview itself, right, seek help from the interviewer. And if you don't know the answer, just be frank and say no because you don't know the answer. Because the thing which I've often noticed is that people typically say a wrong answer, say something else. So it tells me two things: that they don't know what they're talking about, and they do also don't know the correct answer. So it doesn't leave a good impression. So if you don't know, just say no. That just say that I don't know, or maybe seek help from the interviewer, ask for clues and all. Cool. So I'll just close my talk with the final note. So I'll simply say this thing from my favorite philosopher, that in a world abundant of information, the desire for learning is scarce. And that's something like I always keep in mind whenever I feel that, okay, I need to learn more, because we have all the tools at our disposal, especially we are living in an era where everything is easily accessible to us. It's the desire, right? That something is lacking. Cool. So open to Q&A.
Thank you, Hitesh, for a wonderful presentation. So I guess and the last I think 25-30 minutes was little on the, like I said, because some of them for the entry level engineers to comprehend it will take some time. But what I really want to appreciate you is the fact that you brought in the perspective of the UI engineering, right? Like UI or the front end is no longer something people generally tend to think that it is easy, ho jayega. There's a lot of science and engineering that goes behind it. And it's not only about that particular learning a particular language or something, looking into the other aspects, understanding the framework and should you use the framework or not, and other concepts like mobile and then progressive web apps and other things play a very important role. So I think it is quite challenging from your perspective also, because putting it in a 45 minutes to 1 hour, it's like a putting an elephant into a matchbox. I think fairly you covered all the aspects. So what I would request the participants is to take it as a beginning, because no masterclass in an hour, as he also said. I also completely agree that 1 hour you just become this thing, right? But what in the beginning I said is about basically giving you the necessary inputs and perspectives, so that you are forced or you are kind of motivated to take some action. So from taking action perspective, I think I myself could see a lot of takeaways during this presentation, right? I think if you can apply some of them, and also good amount of you just finish the internship with us, based on the React, right? And if you can further build on whatever you learned in your internship, free internship, plus whatever Hitesh has just presented, right? And then I don't see any reason why any of you cannot become a successful front-end developer and working on all the new age cutting edge technologies, right? So that's a great summary, Hitesh. Let us try to see some input or any questions. We learn just yeah. So let's learn from this front internship back end too. So internship primarily we focused on front end and showing how you can integrate with the backend, Leticia. For beginner, which is the best to start off with? Being starting with basics on HTML, fairly yes, right? I think that is a good this thing, right? So, Hitesh, there's a question here. So, could you please suggest some resources to learn these technologies? Any specific resources that you want to?
Yes, so I think one thing I missed in the slide was adding the references and all, right? So when somebody asks me that what are the good resources, I typically ask that, okay, what do you want to learn, right? So let's say if you want to learn JavaScript, I'll say that Mozilla's official developer guide is really amazing. You should follow it. It has all the concepts that you need. If you're looking for CSS, again, Mozilla CSS tricks, and there are a bunch of other resources available. Uh, and then if you're looking for just plain HTML, right, then I think Mozilla or W3 School should be enough. If you're looking for learning React and all, React's official document does a really good job in terms of teaching React to the beginner or even to the people who doesn't know JavaScript. It explains or it gives you enough pointers to learn all of these things. One thing I also recommend people all the time is that subscribe to a newsletter. Most of the tech newsletters are free, especially. So some newsletters like JS Weekly or Node.js Weekly, or maybe just follow some of the, I would say, tech people on the Twitter and see what they are doing and all, right? Because most of the time, I believe that especially the best learning happens when you're learning in the public, right? You're learning with people and you're learning in the group. Especially if you're learning in a silo, you're limited with whatever you have. But if you're learning in a group, you're learning from other people as well, and you're also, your personality development is also happening, right? So in terms of resources, again, there are lots of freely available books on the GitHub. Some of my favorite book about JavaScript is like You Don't Know JS, JavaScript, the good part, and some of the software engineering principles like clean code, refactoring the code, and the pragmatic programmer. These are some of the books which I learned when I was starting my career after college. So I think some of these resources should definitely help you. But yeah, in general, whenever you're stuck, just do a simple Google query and you're sorted. So
Yeah.
because I think Stack Overflow and all of the other forums are like full of information.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for summarizing a lot of resources that students can explore. More questions are coming up. Let us see. We are fine. Hitesh, we can extend few more minutes. Nothing
Yeah,
to.
yeah, sure. Yeah, nothing.
So then Santanam is asking a question. Taking separate course in HTML and CSS, are we building projects and learning what are the tags and styles required for the project? Since we are not using many tags in real-time projects, which is a better approach? So he's asking basically.
Sorry,
So
I
he
did
said,
not understand the question. Yeah.
yeah, there's a question from Santanam. He's asking, should he study HTML and CSS as a course, right? Understanding various tags and various styles.
No. So
Or
this
do a
is yeah.
project and then try to do a reverse
Yeah,
project.
so this is something which people often complain, right? Or people often ask is that like CSS has lots of attributes, lots of properties, and all of these things. HTML has lots of tags, right? Do I need to know by heart all of these things? Of course, no, and nobody knows it. Even I don't know it. If you look at my Google search, most of my Google search which will be very basic, right? Sometimes, like a couple of days ago only, I Googled that, okay, how to add open graph data for Twitter, because you don't know them, right? The thing is that you should have a rough idea about what you want to do. The figuring out how you will do it will be your, like, Google will be your companion. So for example, let's say if you want to create a navbar, right, your Google query will simply be like that, okay, best practice is to create a navbar. If you want to develop a form, best practice is to develop a form. And then you will come across a tons of guidelines or best principles that, okay, this is how you make form accessible, this is how you make a form secure, this is how you add validations and all of those things, right? So no need to remember anything by heart. All you need to know is that this is something you should be able to figure out if you're doing an actual project. Coming from an interview point of view, in interview, nobody asks you what this property does or what this property does. On a high level, people will ask you that, okay, explain the flexbox layout, or maybe how does CSS grid work, or how does browser work. Unless and until unless and until you specifically mention something in your resume, people will not ask. They will ask you fundamental questions, the basic understanding of how overall in terms the web work or an app work, right? What sort of environment it requires and all of those things. But you don't need to cram all of those things for sure.
Yeah. So you need to buy heart, Santanam.
Yeah.
So there's, I think there are a couple of questions about WSA. Let me see if I can take them on. Saurabh is asking, IoT is equal to embedded system plus UI. UI in HTML, CSS, JavaScript. Any course and tutorial to learn from in systematic way like ECP? Yeah, that's a great question, Saurabh. In fact, if you ask us, that is what we are currently working in. I think ECP, the word says that you are familiar with our embedded systems course. So since you use the word embedded system, right, we kind of bring in a full stack perspective about embedded, right? Like how you can start from fundamentals of Linux, going into C programming and things like that, right? So similar way in our WSA, we are actually aspiring to introduce a course which covers the full stack web development. That is our goal, which we are currently working in. I'll show you some dates, somewhere around November mid. We will go live with our course. We're already done our free internship and we're kickstarting our masterclass webinar with this, right? But having said that, I just want to add a point here, because I cannot compare embedded systems in web development, because embedded system largely things have remained stable because it is hardware oriented and you cannot experiment much there. For example, C programming, it remained the same for years and years together, right? Rather you go in deep about how to optimize for a particular hardware, etc., right? The kind of learning at the rate of change that happens there is relatively less. Okay. On the other hand, if you look at the web development, right, things change very fast because browsers are adapting things. Your apps go through very frequent upgrade and everything. Today we are living in the world of SaaS where things get upgraded very fast. So that's been the challenge for us to put up a full stack course similar to embedded. Our team is on it. We are on it, right? Hopefully, we have carved out a methodology using which we are able to bring in the same learning experience. I think that's where I think really happy to see that you guys got a taste of what we offer in embedded, the full stack learning experience. We wanted to bring into the world of web development. And also other challenging web development is a lot of noise around, right? Too many technologies, too many people are talking about, right? So really, separating the noise from the real core. So I don't know whether you guys observed this, what Hitesh has presented today. Two things that stood out me. One is the focus on fundamentals, and then the continuous curiosity on somebody to learn, on a regular basis, right? Nothing is carved in stone, right? So these type of attributes we'd like to bring it in. We are on it. We will be shortly introducing our full stack course. It will be targeted for about 9 months. Again, we debated a lot. Should it be 5 months, 6 months? They said it doesn't cut it, right? We really need to make it 9 months. So we'll be launching it shortly. November 15th is a tentative date. I'll share you some contact details also if you're interested. That is something which we are working on, right? Similarly, Vaishnav is asking question. I have a question. Can WSA start any internship course more having long-term duration, because I need to learn in detail full stack. So in current internship, it does not happen. So is there another is possible? I think the question is similar. So the internship, whatever we did, Hitesh, I think we could not talk about it. So what we have done for the college grads, as you know, the world is especially the tier 2, tier 3 engineering colleges, the internship ecosystem is completely broken. So what we have done is we have put across a 4 weeks, it eventually extended to 6 weeks of a coding boot camp, where we give them a project. For example, they implemented a food cart or the food delivery app by learning HTML, CSS, JS, and React, and then finally they build an end-to-end project and deploy, right? So that's what we've given them, and that is Vaishnav, just to give you guys motivation and a very small kind of ignition in you to get started. But connecting back to the question that Saurabh has asked, to really make it in-depth learn, adding up aspects like what Hitesh has mentioned about data structures is what currently working on. So that's a 9-month program which should go live soon. So there you'll be able to build in-depth the full stack experience, Vaishnav. Okay. Okay, I think Vaishnav has typed, okay. Okay, Prasanna is asking, so to Hitesh Kumar, I have inspired. I am already started best web design, motivated from this webinar. Okay, great, Prasanna. That's a very goal of this webinar. Okay, yeah, great. I think that's pretty much what we have. So can we get some quick feedback, folks? I know it's a little late. We overshot than what we originally planned. Before that, I'll have a few questions to share about the quiz and all. Let me take over, Hitesh. Just be there because we'll be organizing quizzes also. Give me a minute.
Sure.
Yeah, I'll share you the quiz code and everything.
I'll stop sharing.
Yeah, I'll just take the presenter control from me. Yeah. Just a second. Yeah. So as promised, here is the quiz details, guys. Let me put in the presentation mode. All right, here you can see that there is a this is a quiz I'm talking about. Oops. Okay. So you can see that there is a a link there and the quiz code. Request all of you to please take a screenshot of this, because the link, don't worry, we will be emailing you in case if you're not able to remember. But please ensure you note on the quiz code, because we want only the students or participants who attended today's session only to attend to take up the quiz, right? We don't want anybody to take it up. So that is a quiz code. Please take a screenshot of this. Okay. And do not worry about the URL, quiz URL. After this webinar gets over, our team is there. They're in the back end. They're listening to this webinar. They will be emailing you the URL, and then you can, basically take up this quiz. So this quiz will be basically to check, to ensure that whatever you learned today, just to get a reflection of, you're able to, understand that. Plus, we'll also be announcing the top performers in the quiz, and our team will be reaching out to you. They'll be giving you some goodies, and you'll also publish in our social media just to get our motivation going. That's all right. So that's about the quiz, and a few more links. Okay. And some of you asked for the course details. So here is the contact point, our team of counseling. So we are planning to start our full stack web developer course in MERN around 15th November. These are contact details, training at Webstack Academy, and then there's a number there. You can again note it down, and you can reach out to us. Our team of counselors will be, glad to assist you in this regard. Okay. And then one more thing our team has put up is regarding a Telegram group that we have created. You can see there. You can just do a QR code scan of this. Maybe I'll keep it this for a minute or so. You can do a scan of this, and you have created a exclusive Telegram channel or a group, so that we can stay in touch. We can, of course, all the participants, even some of them who are registered but they could not attend today. For all of you, we will be sending you the slide deck that Hitesh has shared, and also this recorded video. We'll just trim it a little bit, and then we'll put it in YouTube and share the link. Those things will remain open, the PPT as well as the video. We'll put it in slide share, so that you can not only you, if you feel that anybody could get benefited from this presentation video, we should be sharing it. Please feel free to share. In the meantime, here is the Telegram channel for you to add, okay, to stay connected with us. And I guess I can come to the last slide. So this is our customary thing about our social media. We are in LinkedIn as well as in Insta. As I said, we are just warming up with quite a lot of good contents there. Again, QR codes are given for LinkedIn as well as in Instagram. You can please go ahead and subscribe for what you call like, share, and subscribe. Okay. So with that note, we have come to a conclusion of this webinar. Can you get some feedback quickly? Let me read it out. Very informative session. Some of the feedback has already come. Hitesh, let me read it out. Thank you, sir. Can you please? It was great, sir. Says Rakshata. Then great, sir. Thank you. Says Shreya. Very informative. Then very informative again. Says Omkar. Thank you, sir. Says Ram Roop. When we'll receive Myntra internship certification completion? Yeah. So with respect to the internship, our team is already evaluating the project output, I guess. Once they complete, we will be sending you the certificates. Whomever has completed, right? Sita Devi is telling really very fruitful. Then Vaishnavi is telling great internship. It gives me a route to create my future. There's a question about our internship. And then Chaitra is telling very informative session. So Shubham, Trisha, it's great to interact, says Subramaniam. It is a great opportunity for the fresher who are willing to get a knowledge about the industry, especially in front end, says Jyoti. Thank you, sir, says Khalid. Thank you for the webinar. It was a pleasure to attend, says Mithilin. It was really helpful, says Sinchana. A great webinar. It was more informative. Thank you, says Govardhan. It was great, very informative, says Sonali. It's blessed session for all of us. Thank you, says Dishna, with some prayers, or thank you symbol in that. I don't know which I can use to render that. Okay. So great. Okay, it gave an idea about how to study and go through the front end, says Akansh. Very good informative class, says Ashwin. Thank you, sir, says Sonali. Waiting to attend more masterclass like this, says Jyoti. Yes, Jyoti, you will watch out, and we are planning to at least do it once in a month or once in 2 months. It's the first one we are getting started, so we will definitely keep it regularly, right? So Letitia asking when the Myntra internship will start again. Letitia, please wait. We're just closing our previous internship. Please watch out our social media or our website. We'll publish the next set of dates. Okay. Yeah. So as Santanam, great interaction, says Sinchana. Thank you, sir. It was very informative, says Teresine. So you are so sweet, says Shushan. I don't know whether it goes to me or Hitesh, or 50-50 will share it. Thank you, says Dilli. Waiting for the next meetup, says Vaishnav. Yeah, great. We'll meet, as I said, we'll conduct regularly. Okay, fantastic. Yeah, thank you very much, guys, for all your kind words. Okay, last but not the least, I would like to thank our speaker, Hitesh. Thank you, Hitesh, for quickly agreeing to our request. I know you're a startup guy. A lot of work with on your your side, and also personally knowing you have a little one to take care. I know it keeps you busy at the home front as well. And today is India Pakistan match, right? So it's hard to take time out, and you can see like a lot of effort you put in presenting this content. Even as I said, some of them could be little overwhelming for a fresh engineer is concerned, but I guess it really did send a message about how they can go about building a career in front end. So thank you very much for your cooperation, support, and coming up with the content. And I think as the feedback says, it means a lot for them. It will make a lot of difference as they go and build a career in this wonderful domain that's really becoming hot.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for giving me a platform to talk after a really long time. So the last talk I gave around I think 3 or 4 years ago. So after so many years, I've given the talk again. So it was quite refreshing for me also because I have to go through all the documents, some of the references and all, because it's been quite a while since I also did my engineering, right? So it was also refreshing for me. So thanks a lot.
Welcome. And last least, there's a team. My team at WSA, they are in the backbone of everything. Sending you guys emails, sending all the social media posters, and then setting up this webinar, etc., right? And also following up on the quiz, which they will be doing in the coming weeks, sending you certificates, goodies, etc. So me and Hitesh more of like front enders, right? But it's a lot of our team in WSA done a lot of back end work. Really thankful to our WSA team for making this happen. So with that note, we'll conclude this particular webinar. And as I said, we will reach out to you guys about the subsequent set of masterclasses, which we'll be conducting regularly. And also as a follow-up of this webinar, just to reiterate, we'll be sharing you the PPT, and we'll be sharing you the recorded video, and you will be getting an email with the quiz link you can take up, and then subsequently next week our team will evaluate and reach out to you regarding the goodies, right? So in the meantime, thank you very much for all of you taking time, and it's really, I'm double happy today. The webinar has gone well, and India has won the match today also. So take care. Good night. Until we see you in the next masterclass webinar. Bye, guys. Thank you, Hitesh. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.